move on to the next segment, which is Wise Ladies segment. This segment is meant for women folk, and then also men could share part of the wisdom from it. Let us enjoy it. If I could turn back time, rewind, if I could make it undone, swear that I would make it up to you. Mama, grown up now. It's a brand new day. I'd like to put a smile on your face. Mama, grown up now. It's a brand new day. I'd like to put a smile on your face every day.
أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين سيدنا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. My name is Khadija Aruyo Hadikumaya and this is Wise Ladies. Today on the program, inshallah, we want to look at one major problem we have come to observe is a factor to the social menace we have in our homes today. And of course, like we ordinarily understand, the marriage is the basic unit of a society, and once we begin to record a whole lot of divorces due to some things we have done in the past that we did not realize could add up to the problems we are beginning to face in our marriages, then we begin to wonder, where did we go wrong? What did we do in the past? Or perhaps it's still happening in the present that is beginning to, cause so much havoc in our marriages and thus in the society. But before I actually introduce my guest to you, it is a usual practice to go on this short break, and when we come back, you will be meeting my special guest. So please stay tuned. Alhamdulillah, you're welcome back, and the program is still Wise Ladies. Like I said, today we want to look at what the travels of free mixing are. And like I introduced earlier, it is one major problem that is causing so much problem and havoc in our society, basically in the marriages and of course in the larger society. So today we want to look at the things we do wrong that actually leads to free mixing and so much more. But before we actually delve into what we have for today, I would like you to meet our guest, and starting from my far left, that's Ajia Aziza Sanusi. Haja, assalamu alaikum to Avocado.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you feeling today?
I'm very much thankful. Alhamdulillah.
Haja Rukoya. Adubi and your BCS. Aja Rukoya Adubi and your BCS. Assalamu alaikum to Avocado.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
How are you feeling today?
Alhamdulillah. Thank you so much for having me.
Alhamdulillah. Today we want to talk about travels of free mixing. Please, to start with, when you actually hear the word free mixing, what readily comes to your mind?
Well, free mixing, if you want to look at it in general terms, and then also considering Islam, it is the relationship, the way we relate with between sexes, men, women, the way we relate with one another in the society. In the world we live in, there are so many things that we do we can't do on our own. So free mixing, like the word has it, relating with one another, relating with the opposite sex.
Okay. Jerukaya, do you concede to that?
Well, in the general term, free mixing is actually what she has said. But what is the Islamic perspective of free mixing? If you would ask me that question, then I would like to say that free mixing has to do with mingling or relating with the opposite sex, not minding the Islamic rules that you are supposed to abide by when you actually mix with this opposite sex. I'm talking about rules such as lowering the gaze. Okay. I'm talking about rules such as hugging or probably handshaking the opposite sex. Okay. These are some of the things that should actually come to our mind when we relate with the opposite sex.
And when we look at it, of course, Islam is a religion, a complete religion that tells us how to live our entire lives. And if we say we are truly Muslims and we have adopted the basics of Islam, what it means is that we do not decide what is wrong and right
Of course.
by ourselves. We rely solely on what the Quran says and what the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said. So now we want to look at what does the Quran say, because like you said, the Islamic position of free mixing, because free mixing, like you said, is when when men and women come together. And know that in every society there would always be instances where men and women would always come together. But what are the restrictions? What are the do's and don'ts when these men come together? So that's what we want to look at now. What are the Islamic injunctions that actually guide those situations, those instances when men and women would have to come together?
Well, like we all know, Muslims all together, we know that living here on earth, we are living for reasons of one great being that created us all. And he has made it convenient for us by giving us the rules and regulations, the do's and don'ts that he would prefer us to live with. If we have that at the bottom of our mind, that we have rules and regulations that will guide the way we live, Islam being the way of life, then I don't think we would go wrong. If you want to come by the topic that we're talking about today, free mixing, there are rules, there are regulations that are stipulated in the Quran that Muslim brothers and sisters have to follow. The major thing that will be the sin, that will be the crime committed out of free mixing is adultery and fornication. And that is like the major crime that would be committed. But it wouldn't start just like that. Like you mentioned before we started this recording, that it's like a pathway. You don't get to the destination of committing the crime just
Major
like that.
crime,
You there are steps that one goes through. If we want to avoid such steps, free mixing is one major thing that we have to consider. And like Sister Rekoya has also mentioned, eye contact, handshake, hugs, and so on and so forth. These are like the pathway that leads to the crime, that leads to sin, that it must be prevented.
And that major
so
sin
the
we're
rules
looking at here is fornication and adultery.
Yes.
And of course, we're looking at the consequences of fornication and adultery, as it were. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said in Quran, for every fornicator, what do you do to them? You actually lash them 100 times. And for an adulterer is a married man or a married woman who eventually, engages in this in an extramarital sexual relationship. The recompense for that is thrown into that. If we look at the punishment that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has accorded to this sin, one gets to wonder how much the consequence of the steps, like you said, the final destination is fornication and adultery. So if the final destination, which is adultery and fornication, attracts such intense recompense, what do we say of those things that make up the pathway to the final destination? Ajia Rekoya.
Well, alhamdulillah, we are Muslims and we have rules that actually guide our day-to-day activities. What are the consequences of actually staring at one another? If you look at this, for instance, I can say when I stare at the opposite sex, there is this eye contact. It could actually lead to temptation, and temptation is not something that starts when you actually start touching with one another. It starts from mere looking. Some will say, what's the big deal in actually looking at the opposite sex? Am I not just looking? But the truth is, are you just looking actually? When you look at this the word looking, it involves emotions. We're not just talking about that. In Islam, it is permissible for you to actually look and remove your eyes. It is permissible, that once that you look and then you remove your eyes. But when it comes to looking and actually staring, that's what we're actually saying now.
And
that
no relationship starts, because the moment every relationship, every sensational feeling starts with the eyes.
Of course, it starts with a communication. It's a form of communication.
It's a major form of communication, because the moment you actually sight a person and you say, oh, she's gorgeous, oh, she's dark, oh, she's fat, oh, she's thin, and then that's the messages start going, oh, I think I like her, or what do you think?
Of course, that's how it all starts. So it now depends on the individual to be able to curb such. But if you're not able to stop the looking, then you have you have instances where some people actually go to say it with their mouth this time around, communicating verbally. I mean, you say what is actually in your mind, and if the person we're talking about in concern wills or consents to such and
Such
advances, then you know what will become of the
Yeah.
society, or will become of that person in particular, and the society in general. Well, so I just feel that we should actually curb the way we look, because we are
Allah
not
Subhanahu
just
even said
looking.
it in the Quran that you will believe, lower your gaze, because of course when you don't, it's even a commandment of Allah.
Of
Subhanahu
course
wa
it
Ta'ala.
is.
Lower your gaze. If you're a man, lower your gaze when you're relating with the opposite sex, and if you're a woman, lower your gaze when you're relating with the opposite sex, because, and of course Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala also ordered us to conceal our beauty except that which is apparent thereof.
Of course.
So when we actually, other than the fact that we have the consequences which are apparent, because chemistry and all the things start with looking at the other person. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has also ordered us, and remember we said that we're Muslims and we don't get to decide what we want to do by ourselves other than what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has instructed us to do. So other than that, let's look at shaking hands with the opposite sex. Are there apparent consequences of shaking hands with the opposite sex?
Well, definitely we are all humans, and then there's this sense of touch that we all react to. So whether we like it or not, whether we admit it or not, there is always a reaction when you touch another person's hand, or less to say the opposite sex's hand. I think the reaction that comes from the men to the women is even more, because it is biologically, it's like the women have soft palms in comparison to the men. So with that, even if you don't say it, there is this sensation that gets to
triggered.
you. This is you have sexy palms, you have this and that, and
even if he doesn't get to say it verbally, he gets to
yes,
express it.
you feel it in you, and then from there it could grow to something else, and then that is how it starts. And
The Prophet even said that that it is better for you to hold on to a hot coal than to shake the opposite sex. And if you look at the society today, people don't even see anything wrong in shaking. Why are we talking about shaking? Let's talk about hugging now. Have you ever thought about the fact that hugging involves maybe your chest coming in contact? Thank you. You get to feel the person's smell. You get to feel the person's touch. What do we say about that?
Let's say have a complete. Let's put okay. I'll pass on that. Let's go.
No, but seriously, what do we say about hugging? Hugging is a norm in the society today. If you tell people you don't hug, you're seen as someone who is maybe not
backward.
Of course, backward.
Archaic.
Outdated, actually.
someone who doesn't live with the trend, what is involved
in the society.
And that's a marvelous point you just read. Does that translate? Does shaking hands with the opposite sex, hugging the opposite sex, mixing freely, and I say mixing freely, not considering the do's and don'ts or the restraints Allah SWT has actually placed when you come in contact with opposite sex, is surpassing or outdoing those things? Does it satisfy you as someone who's living a full life, who's living a civilized life? What really is civility? What's a sanity in this world today?
In reaction to that statement that you made, I would say majority of human beings alive don't really. We ignore the essence of our existence. We don't give deep thought, deep thinking to why we are here. We think about now. We don't think about tomorrow, or we don't think about hereafter. Majority of humans alive don't even think there is life after death. There is day of judgment. We live because we just want to enjoy it now, and we just want to be in record that we had fun living. So if we all have, as is collectively and as individuals, we always have time to ourselves to meditate, to talk about after now, to talk about after death, to talk about the supreme being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that the essence of our existence we shall recount, we shall give account to. I think with that we'll be able
People
to
will
like
become more
adjust.
insensitive,
Yes,
and
we'll
we want to
adjust,
know
and then
what is right from what is wrong.
for every
And then-
little thing we'll do, we consider that how am I going to account for this? Is it going to be in positive books or negative books? I think with that we could like
Dying doesn't mean you are going to a place and returning in 2 or 3 months. It means total extinction. So it means that this time around you're going to meet your Lord. What have you done? If you begin to have sober reflections, if you begin to have reflections about how you would like to be remembered,
Because
like you
the
said.
the fact still remains that to Allah we will definitely return.
Of
and
course.
He has actually forbidden the act of shaking hands with the opposite sex, because He has also forbidden the act of staring hard into the eyes of the opposite sex, because all these are let's say trellises on the pathway to zina. And zina, He has said, is a sin He would never forgive. Except, of course, you're repentant. That is at the point of dying. If you're a person who commits zina, the destination for such a person is hellfire. And it ordinarily calls to my mind, some things that I actually read in a book as to, the punishment some women who are engaged in free mixing and in adultery and fornication would actually go through. There was this time, the Prophet ﷺ actually went on an ascension into the seventh heaven, remember? And, Angel Jibril came to pick his soul and told him, okay, let's proceed. And, there was this part, the very part I want to mention that's of most importance to us, is he came across an oven. And before he even approached that oven, there was this odious, goring smell coming from it. Okay, I guess I'm going to have to continue on that story after this short break. So please, just stay with us. We'll be right back whilst they just still continue after this short break. Please stay with us.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Al-Iman Masham.
So what is your opinion about free mixing in a school setting like this?
Okay, in a school environment like this, you have the premixing is very common in the sense that it's a combination of the females and the males. Like for instance, now if you're in class and then the next person sitting to you is a male, and he has an idea of what your religion says and everything, and he wants to get something from you by just tapping you or just trying to call your attention. The best thing to do in that kind of scenario is as soon as he taps you and all that, just let him know that, sorry, I'm a Muslim. The next time you want to get across to me, you can just call me Hajia or something, but going as far as touching me is not allowed in Islam.
Okay, so how do you think we can prevent adultery? Because some people still insist that they want to shake you.
Yeah.
There's some cases like that, you see that I want to shake you. So what do you think?
That's very common in a scenario where someone you meet a friend or something, or your friend is with another friend and you greet that particular friend and the other friend wants to shake you. You're like, okay, what's your opinion on shaking the other sex and all? You just tell the person, what's the whole point of shaking you? Like, what would you derive? I don't have to shake you before getting to know you.
You don't even have to put the
Exactly.
That's your opinion.
Exactly. I don't have to shake you. So what would you gain from shaking me? I can as well just say hi to you and all. So I do not have to go as far as shaking you just to go in the friendship basis.
Do you think that's one of the reasons of adultery and fornication, like it's spreading wide?
Yeah. Sort of. It has something to do with adultery and all that, because going as far as shaking the opposite sex, you're like, okay, wow, okay. If the particular opposite sex has a body temperature of that is very cool and all, like, oh, this person's hand is very cool, and then you start thinking about stuff like. That's where immoral thoughts just start coming in, and I think free mixing should be avoided as much as possible. In any way, yeah. Haliman Masham.
Samai.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Yakub Fadila.
So what's your opinion about free mixing
In
school setting?
okay, free mixing is not really a good thing, because when there's free mixing, there'll be intermingling between opposite sex. They'll be moving around together. Their bodies will be hitting each other and then hugging, shaking, all those things. I don't think it's a very good idea, because it's going to lead to feelings to start developing, infatuation, and then can even lead to adultery. So I think it's it's not something something that should be limited. We shouldn't allow free mixing like that.
So how can you convince somebody that okay, this thing is not good as a Muslim without you not saying that okay, this is what the religion says? Like, you can just be logical about it.
Yes. When you're logical, when you think about it, free mixing. Okay, you can imagine if you are with a guy and you guys hug, you shake hands. There's no how. The feelings start developing. By the time you hug, your chest will touch each other, and there's no how. You start feeling some things. Especially the guy. Even if you have a clean mind, the guy, there's no how. That's how the normal physiological makeup of man is. They start feeling, this girl's hand is soft, oh my god, this girl's hand, her chest is soft and everything, and then there's no how. Even you start developing feeling, I think, how god, the guy's chest is hard and everything, so you start feeling like, oh, I want to kiss him, I want to do things with him, and that's when it can lead to something very, very bad and that you won't be able to control.
I know that these are saying that it's better to touch a coal of fire rather than shaking.
Yes, yeah.
So what can you say?
Yeah, I think it's true, because when
It's prohibited in Islam.
yeah, it's prohibited
Some
in
people doesn't know that it's prohibited. They will tell you that it's not in the Quran.
Yeah, it is. It's not even Prophet Allah said in the Quran that do not move near zina. So doing near doesn't mean that do not commit it. Don't do anything that will lead you into it. For example, shaking hands. By the time you start shaking hands, oh, the girl's hand is soft. Oh, I want to touch it. I'm sure every part of our body is soft. And then you start thinking. Even the thinking itself can lead to action.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. You're welcome back, and it's the White Ladies, and we're simply talking on the travels of free mixing. Free mixing. So we have less than a minute to go, my fellow sisters. Let's briefly look at the physical, the societal, and the emotional consequences of free mixing. I would like to start with you, Haja Aziza. What do you consider the possible consequences of free mixing?
Well,
On physical self.
Like we mentioned earlier on, that the final stage of free mixing, it would probably lead to fornication and adultery.
Okay.
But I will just mention at this point that if you can just have in mind that free mixing, especially as Islam rules, is just the preventive measure for these things.
All right then. Let's take note of that preventive measure, and of course, if you actually keep away from all those things that accumulate as free mixing, you would definitely not fall into the major heights. And I want to reiterate here that Prophet Sam said that a man and a woman who are not marams, that they are not tied by blood, by virtue of being a brother or a sister, are not allowed to stay in the same room, because the third person in that room will be Shaitan, and that, if you look at it, is always the reason why a man and a woman commit fornication, when a man and a woman who are not bound by blood ties stay in a room in confinement all by themselves. Hajar Rukaya, any last message you want to pass on to?
I want to say that the society would suffer if we permit or we continue in this trend of free mixing. There will be single parenthood.
Yes.
People would have to commit abortion, and when all of this happens, the society in the end will have to suffer. Besides the people involved in the zina or in the fornication or adultery, as the case may be.
All right, thank you so much, my dear sisters, for coming on the show. It's been an interesting one, and I pray that Allah protect us and save us from His wrath and from all actions that would actually lead to His wrath. One of which is, of course, free mixing. I want to take this opportunity to thank. I'm sure you would have actually observed a wonderful difference in our set, and that is all thanks to Haja Shalila Ragi, who of course is the CEO of Touch Royale. This is a wonderful touch, and I'm so we are all so grateful to you. So if you have a function, a wedding function,